computer. Okay, so now I'm recording you, so you're online. Welcome to YouTube.
Okay, there's share screen. Oh, it says no.
I'll give you a share screen. I do that.
Okay, perfect. Well, this is what I propose, Herman, even though I made this beautiful presentation for you all.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that my mobile hotspot can't handle it.
Okay.
And it's not going to transmit, So what I'll do is I'll go off that and I'll talk and I'll just try to do interpretive dances.
Okay. We see it.
We have.
Yay! We see it.
All right.
And do you see the PowerPoint or do you see it like it's being edited?
Edited.
No, it looks like the whole thing.
Well, it's not.
You just have to make it larger.
What about this?
Yes.
That's correct?
Too large.
Bingo.
Hallelujah. All right, let's hope this works.
So give us a brief introduction. You're with the University of Florida Extension, and we did Biscayne Bay Water Watch together, where we measured the quality of the water in Biscayne Bay for several years, right?
Yeah, Herman, you were one of the longest running.
There we go.
Running folks who participated.
Well, how can I help avoiding that? So anyway, you did a blog a couple weeks ago on the fish kill, and some info. You're current on that, so thought we'd ask you to come talk to us about it and the water condition in Biscayne Bay at this point, if you don't mind.
I would be happy to, and thank you for that introduction.
You also have an association with University of Miami too, don't you? Something with that as well?
Well, I'm an alumna of University of Miami, but otherwise no official affiliation aside from the fact that my office is there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I'll explain that briefly. For those whom I haven't met yet, my name is Zangroniz, and I have had the pleasure of working with Herman and some of your other members in a volunteer water quality monitoring program that I ran called Biscayne Bay Water Watch. And I am the Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent in Miami-Dade County, which is part of the University of Florida IFAS Extension Service. And in short, I am the Marine Science Extension Agent, which simply means that I'm here to extend the scientific information coming from the University of Florida and other academic institutions to any marine resource users. And obviously, fishermen are a huge, very important marine stakeholder here in Miami-Dade. And I figured when Herman asked me to talk about the Bay, I figured it was a safe assumption that this was likely to be the topic. And I've been on a number of phone calls since the start of the fish kill event, and I've been doing some of my own water monitoring as well. And so I'm sure there are probably varying levels of knowledge of what's going on. So what I'll do is, if it's okay with everyone, I'll try and present the following slides, and then we can have discussion further when we're done. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions I don't know the answers to, but you have my word that I will take them back to the folks that can answer them, and I will follow back up with you.
That's great.
Thank you. First I wanted to, oh yeah, thank you, Herman. I was just going to ask if anyone, if you don't mind, just because I'm a little bit of hyper intense with sounds and distractions, if you wouldn't mind please muting your microphone, that would be great. Thank you. We're going to start with a rough timeline of the fish kill event. And the first sighting of dead fish occurred back on Monday, August 10th. And that was from a swimmer who constantly is swimming off of Morningside Park, and even went as far as to collect several specimens and call Miami Waterkeeper. Actually, the call first came into Rasmus, and then from there, Miami Waterkeeper started getting more reports. And by the next day, there were many other hundreds of dead fish and stranded fish sightings south of Morningside Park. So the fish kill event seemed to not be as localized anymore. And where I came in, where my radar really went up, was by Wednesday, August 12th, there was this report of several hundred stranded Atlantic stingrays at Pelican Harbor Marina at Pelican Harbor Seabird Station. And so that was when I went up there to make some observations and take some data, and I'll share that with you briefly. By the end of that week, there were reports of what looked to be algal blooms in the North Bay, and pretty much all of this was contained to the northernmost region of the bay, which is roughly considered from the Rickenbacker Causeway north. And the following week, once these reports and observations started, floodgates, pardon the pun, just kept going. Then there were reports of white foam, which just could be so many things, natural, organic, or stuff that was precipitated by the algal blooms. And then, fortunately, by August 26th or so, this fish kill event seemed to have ended. So roughly a little over 2-week period of this dead fish and algal bloom situation that was happening throughout North Bay. And this map that you should be seeing on the screen is from Miami Waterkeeper, and this was their Google map that they used to track the different reports or observations of first the different fish kills, then the algae blooms, and then as well as the reports of white foam.
You know what, Anna?
So you can see.
Anna, I'm sorry, the full screen, we're not getting the whole thing. Maybe if you go back to the edit mode, it seems to be better to see it all.
Man.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Sorry, you guys. Hang on. What did I do?
If not, just keep going.
Okay. How does this look? Does it seem like you're seeing the whole screen?
Yeah, that's better. That's better.
That's better.
Much
Okay.
better.
Good. Thank you. I've got now 2 of everybody on my screen, so double the trouble. So if you look at the map, you'll see that the fish kill reports extend almost down to, and if you can see my mouse, I'm trying to move it slowly, but the fish kill reports extend almost all the way, and a few localized sites just around the Rickenbacker Causeway. And the algae blooms were really concentrated in North Bay. And the validity or how accurate these reports are is really hard to say, because these were largely being reported by everyday people who lived on the waterways. So they were seeing anything that looked unusual, which is great, but we don't know if we were seeing multiple algal blooms or one algal bloom or what. And so this was very, very quickly looked to be a dissolved oxygen driven fish kill event. And I'm sure all of you guys are very familiar, but just to cover my bases, dissolved oxygen simply refers to the amount of available oxygen that's in the water for submerged aquatic vegetation, benthic invertebrates, and fish to breathe from. And just like anything else, there are parameters. You have too little dissolved oxygen, which is not good, too much dissolved oxygen, which is not good. So we're always looking for that central, that Goldilocks and the 3 bears just right range. And there are a lot of factors that can drive the levels of dissolved oxygen. And at this time of year, probably the most significant one has to do with temperature. And why does temperature matter? Well, the hotter the oxygen, the less available oxygen that's able to be held in the water. And to give you an idea of what I found when I went up to Pelican Harbor Seabird Station back on Wednesday the 12th, I was able to take readings both at the surface and at depth. And if you check out the nifty little chart I made for you, Herman's probably very familiar with some of these numbers here, but on the surface, the dissolved oxygen levels were higher than at depth. And I'd like to point out the surface dissolved oxygen, 1.96 milligrams per liter, that's too low, even though it's the higher of the 2 readings. And at depth, it wasn't even 0.5 milligram per liter. And when I saw the disparity and that the dissolved oxygen level was higher at the surface than at depth, I immediately thought, well, this isn't about temperature. Because if you think about in the summer, usually the water at the surface is warmer. And the warmer the water, the less oxygen, versus the deeper the water, the cooler the oxygen, the deeper the water, the cooler the temperature, less oxygen, more oxygen is available. And in this case, it was reversed. And that also explained why there were so many reports of fish seeming to be gasping for air at the surface. It explained why the stingrays were coming ashore to where the water was shallowest, because they were trying to get to the most oxygen that they could. One thing, before I leave this, one thing that I'd like to note as well is that these measurements were taken during the daytime. And just for fun, I know I said I'd wait for questions at the end, but can anyone guess why the measurements might be different at night or when it's dark out versus day?
Cooler surfaces.
Chlorophyll.
Not chlorophyll. What happens during the daytime when the sun is out?
Photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis, exactly. So I'll come back to that. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that in the literature, dissolved oxygen levels that are 2 milligrams per liter or less for as little as 1 day can lead to severe fish mortality events, which is exactly what we saw.
What's the normal value in Biscayne Bay? I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
That's okay. Normal healthy value, anywhere from 3 to 6, depending in the location of the bay. 3 is considered the baseline for a good or average. So 3 to 6 average in the bay. And I don't know if the Pedersens, Mr. Pedersen is on, but he and his son had monitored a couple of sites that were really close on the shallowest west edges of the bay near Mercy Hospital, and they always had consistently low dissolved oxygen there.
Right.
You might have seen on the news that in response to these events, this was so large, so drastic that anyone and everyone was trying to think of ways to try and stop this from happening, or to try and at least bring the water conditions enough oxygen to give the fish a fighting chance. At Pelican Harbor Seabird Station, aerators were donated, placed in the water by the Frost Science Museum to try and circulate and oxygenate the water, as well as the Seabird Station actually bought their own sump pump just to try and keep the water moving. The larger, more visible event that got a lot of press was that Miami-Dade County fire rescue boats drove through the bay spraying water, which is featured in this image here. And these may have helped. It's really hard to be certain, but I think we could likely all agree on upon the fact that this is not a very long-term or sustainable approach, nor is it really addressing the root of the problem. But at the time, it was really this, let's try and keep fish from, let's try not to lose more fish. And then another aspect that came as a response as well as intervention was this assembly of volunteers who willingly signed up for the glamorous job to try and remove the dead fish, because the concern from the scientific community was that as these dead fish began to decay, they would break down and decompose and create bacteria that could then potentially start to fuel an algae bloom, which could then lead to more fish kills and create this cyclical process that who knows when it would end. So these volunteers came out to remove thousands of dead fish, and dumpsters were donated and placed in some of the local marinas to dispose of them. And then, of course, the big question is, how did this happen? Why did this happen? It's not breaking news that conditions in Biscayne Bay have been precarious for a long time. However, it's highly unlikely that we'll ever really know what the exact trigger was. So that's where all of the agencies and institutions who are communicating are looking at all these other pieces of the puzzle to try and narrow that down. One of the huge things that has been considered and discussed was the 2017 seagrass die-off in the Juliet-Tuttle Basin. So not only is that seagrass gone, that area is no longer photosynthesizing and providing oxygen into the water. And I'm not entirely familiar with how long seagrass takes to decay or move from a system, but it's thought that there might still be cascading effects from that event, even though it's 3 years later now. We also, unfortunately, have a big nutrient problem within all of Miami-Dade County. Non-point sources of pollution, like septic systems, even when they function properly, they can still put nutrients into a system. We have our very old and sometimes failing sewer system and sewage treatment system. Chemicals, including fertilizers and pesticides, are also other major sources of input into the system. Sorry, I have to move my thing because I'm actually blocking my slide. Oh, and then of course, the increasing water temperatures. Even though that was not really the trigger in this event, it's only going to keep getting hotter and the water is only going to keep getting warmer. There's also some talk of the stratification of the water, or in other words, the differences when there are freshwater pulses that might be cooler that are creating a layer on top of the warmer, saltier water on the bottom. And then another major overhanging factor is how our water is managed here in South Florida. We know that water comes from the weather. We get major rain events pretty consistently, especially now during the wet season, but also the water management system that's set up in Florida, and that includes discharges from Lake O and water management through the canal system. And that's what I wanted to talk about. This is one of the major, this is like the aha moment for getting a little bit closer to a potential cause for this fish kill event. This is a graph that was created by Dr. Chris Langdon of Rasmus, and he was looking at the rainfall, average rainfall in Miami-Dade County. And the black line, where's my mouse? This black line across the bottom, this is the average rainfall from 1991 to 2019. And these are simply the day of the year by the day. So day 150 is May 29th, just to give you a point of reference. The red line is the rainfall just for 2020. So black is that 28-year period from 91 to 2019, and red is 2020. So you can see that there were a few significant rainfall events that took place earlier this year, but by and large, there was nothing that was crazy. And the rainfall average compared from 91 to 2019 to 2020, this year's rainfall was only 1.4 times higher. The average was 1.4 times higher than the average from that other period. And this is the other important graph to look at. Again, this black line is reflecting 1991 to 2019. And the red line is 2020. So you can see that this black line, this is the inputs from the Little River. So the water flowing out of and being discharged from the Little River into the bay has remained relatively stable and consistent over time. But the discharges this year are drastically higher. And so I have the exact figure on one of the next slides. I can't see it because my notes view is hidden. But based upon that, the rainfall is still not enough to account for this higher level. The rainfall isn't substantial enough to account for this higher level of output from the Little River. And to narrow it down even further, this graph is comparing the Little River, which is the C7 canal, to the Biscayne Canal, or C8. And you can see that they're pretty steady for the most part. But then again, this year, the discharges from the Little River Canal really skyrocket in comparison. Aha, here's my table, perfect, good. And the parts that you really wanna focus on are these different time blocks. So here's that time period, 91 to 2019. The average flow in cubic feet per second from the Little River was 208 compared to 27 average inches of rainfall over that period. And then in this year alone, here's the true figure, 724 cubic feet per second of discharge from the Little River. And then when you look at the rain, the accumulation of rainfall isn't really that much higher. So the ratios don't compare, and based upon these data, the scientific community is leaning very heavily at focusing in on the discharges from the Little River as perhaps being one of, if not the main trigger of this fish kill event.
Mm.
And since I started monitoring at Pelican Harbor, I monitored there every day for about 10 days. And now I've dropped back to weekly monitoring. And if you remember back to what it was, the dissolved oxygen was there on the first day. On the surface, 1.96 milligrams per liter, and at the bottom, 0.48. Now the dissolved oxygen levels are pretty stable, and this is much more appropriate of where they should be. And there's almost no difference between the surface and the bottom levels of dissolved oxygen. And since I asked you that question before, I want to loop back around about what do you think's happening at night? And Herman and I believe someone else jumped in and said there's no photosynthesis. And that's absolutely correct. And that was something that was really quite alarming in the first few days of the fish kill. Once, I believe it was FIU was able to deploy some buoys that captured data 24 hours a day. And at one point, one of those buoys hit zero milligrams per liter dissolved oxygen in the bay overnight. And that didn't start upticking until a few hours after it got to be light out. So there have been times, those periods of time where the bay in certain areas have been completely anoxic, completely without oxygen. So conversations have been had about trying to get other instruments that can record continuously like that. That's not something I have the capability of doing unless I physically go when it's dark out or at 4 or 5 in the morning, which I don't know. We'll see if I'm up for an adventure. And even though this seems to have dwindled in its coverage, and it's not getting as much play, we're not seeing as many of the scary photographs anymore, that doesn't mean that the response efforts have stopped. There are now weekly coordination calls between many agencies and academic institutions, and now there are strategic plans for monitoring, as well as trying to develop certain criteria to try and have a better way to predict if this might happen again. So based off of the different agencies and the different types of monitoring that are happening, that's one of the main goals of this larger coordinated group, is to try and develop a better way to know if we're about to get another fish kill before it happens. So maybe some of those interventions can be employed in the meantime, or maybe there's a better way to, if it comes down to it, connect with the water management district to see how they might be able to change handling the water, if that ends up being the case. And so the grand conclusion is there are more questions than there are answers, although I think we do know a little bit more now versus when we started. I'm continuing to monitor at Pelican simply because it was one area, the Seabird station, and 2 other sites within a marina compound. That was one area that no one was specifically focusing on, so I've clamped onto it. And it's easy access for me, and I'm very comfortable. The staff there know me, so I have no trouble getting in. I'm also monitoring at Matheson Hammock because although there weren't reports of any fish kills or any other algae observances at Matheson, we wanted to start establishing a baseline just in case, just to know what things look like in case something pops up again. So those are the things that I'm in charge of for the time being. I've also been working very closely with the manager of DERM's, Miami-Dade County's Division of Environmental Resource Management, the manager of the Restoration and Enhancement section, to try and develop a really robust educational component for a proposed county-wide fertilizer ordinance. The idea being that the answer isn't simply enough to put rules in about fertilizer, that if there's not a very strategic educational component associated with it, people can have all the rules in the world, but if they are not being understood and then later applied, the ordinance is likely not going to be very effective. There's also another University of Florida IFAS program going on that is specifically looking at developing a community-based social marketing campaign to engage communities that are due for septic to sewer conversion, to try and facilitate that, because that is something that receives a lot of blame and people tend to point fingers at, but it's not, it turns out it's not as simple as just do the project. Even for those who might be able to afford it, it's not just oh sure, I'm gonna do it. It's a very complex issue. So I've been assisting one of my colleagues with that project as well. And then something else that we've been trying to look at is creating a very low-level nutrient hotspot map just for internal use, to then try and deliver targeted education to entities, for example, golf courses, who may have this vested interest in keeping their grass very, very green, and providing targeted education with respect to how to do it appropriately, how to irrigate, use best management practices, and so on. And then the latest thing that came out of the gate was this naming of a new position. I'm not sure where it's going to be categorized, but Mayor Jimenez decided that there's going to be a chief bay officer who is going to be, this is going to be their sole project, is to develop criteria for water quality for the bay and handle things solely for Biscayne Bay. So it is my intent and my colleagues' intent to get in up close and personal with that person and make sure we're a part of being on their radar and also helping facilitate some of the education behind what is likely to come down the pipe. So I know that was an awful lot. I want to thank everybody for listening, and please stay in touch with me. Well, ask me questions here. I put my email on the screen, and Herman has my contact information, but I welcome you and hope to speak with you all at any time.
Anna, do you have any idea, Anna, how many hundreds of tons Home Depot of fertilizer, Home Depot and Lowe's, and you could throw in Ace, I'm sure, hardware, how many hundreds of tons do they sell a year in Dade County and Broward County?
Not only fertilizer, but weed and feed.
Yeah, pesticide. Yeah, I don't.
Their lobbyists probably will fight us tooth and nail.
I think we should nominate Anna as the chief.
I'm not qualified, but thank you.
You do great. I have a question for you, Anna.
Sure.
Out on Tamiami Trail, out past the Miccosukee, with the new bridges that allow the water to go under them, they're pumping more water this year than I've ever seen in my life. And I'm wondering if that could be tied to some of the uptick in the water flow in Little River. It could be pushing its way through the city and, you know, the Frog Pond and all out there. I mean, it's south of 8th Street, but I'm telling you, the water in that area, Henry, is what, 3 feet higher than normal. And they're pumping 3 of 4 pumps out there continuously. And they've been doing that.
I don't know, but
For all through the summer.
Yeah.
Maybe they're
Even down at Flamingo, the pumps on the edge of Flamingo on the border.
out of Okeechobee, instead of pushing it out the Fort Pierce Inlet and the what is it, Factahatchee, they're pushing it south and down through the Frog Pond and out that way. But it may be making its way into the Little River, and that may, you know, because that increased water flow is pretty interesting number.
Yeah, they could cut that dam open, close it.
Anna, when you guys looked at the flows that were coming out of Little River, did anybody take a look at the data from the structures of the district to see where it originated? Because Little River just goes all the way to the Palmetto and then it starts going down and receiving waters from other canals. So it must have come from someplace.
I'm not certain. I'm not certain if he looked at that or if that is publicly available. Was that Peter who asked?
Yes.
I'm making a note of it, Peter.
because
To see
you
if
know
I
that,
can find out.
yeah, the district keeps data on all of those canals, and somebody can go back and find out if they divert waters, you know, out of one area to another, and they just pushed it down Little River. They done that to us many times. You know, they just like they just want the water out of Broward, or they want the water out of the conservation area, and they just push it down to us, and you know, they think Miami-Dade County is the toilet of the system. Just flush it down, you know.
I
There's
will
a lot
see
of,
what I
you know,
can find out.
if you get a lot of that fresh water being pushed out as a slug out of the Little River Canal, and it's got very little place to go except, you know, it's like, reminds me of a long time ago when the district, or no, it wasn't the district, I think it was the farmers blew out the dam at C-111 Canal, and they did a fish kill in Manatee Bay.
Okay. Oh, that's
Also, aren't there 2 or 3 dams used to meter the water? They keep those dams closed and force it somewhere else?
Yeah, they all of that right now, nowadays, the last time I was working on anything like that, all of those dams are all automated. They have a control system there by 54th Street and near the Palmetto, and they electronically control all of that with switches.
Yeah.
But the point I would make is if the water levels are high on the west side, maybe those dams are automatically opening because they're pumping so much water down there behind the Miccosukee.
Yeah.
And we do know for a fact the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't really care as long as they get their water moved.
Right. Perfect.
Don't care where it goes.
That's what we've had before.
Yeah, it's always that struggle of flood protection and human life, and
aren't they doing a lot of construction on the Little River now? Aren't they doing some new restaurants and all that stuff along the waterway? Maybe they're
high rises up there behind Jackson, right?
Yeah, maybe they're moving water out of there so they can do construction and stuff.
it certainly could be.
I mean, it's unbelievable. They've been moving water south, Jesus Christ, all year, right, Herman?
Yeah, since
all year,
April or May.
Yeah, and then now it's so high on 8th Street. I know they're trying to go down, but I know it might even go out through Sawgrass Recreational, which goes
even parts of the dirt
east.
road next to the dike are underwater because the water level's so high in the canals.
Yeah.
There we go.
There you are.
I just stopped the share because my computer was getting
Now we can see you and some of the speakers too.
Oh, okay.
I know down in Black Point when they open up Moody Canal and they move a lot of water out of there. I mean, tons of fresh water. I've even said that the blue crabs aren't there that much because so much fresh water. It's all brackish here. I've seen it.
High tide, it almost stops, and low tide, it's just flooding out of there. So it's also, you know, adjusted by the tide.
Yeah, I fish in Moody Canal only on the incoming tide because I know that they're not going to be pumping fresh water out because the tide's coming in and it's clean salt water going into it. But right when that starts going out, they open up the gate. And out of Black Point, they pump a lot of water out of there when it's raining.
The C-100 canal.
Yeah.
They used to do the Aerojet Canal. They finally put a salt intrusion dam down there just past the boat ramp, and they stopped the flow. But the Aerojet, all of Card Sound would go fresh water every summer, and you could go down below the arsenikers and smell the fresh water. And now they put a salt intrusion dam. It's like I said, down at the Aerojet Canal there where it crosses US 1, and so they stopped that flow. So for the past 4 or 5 years now, they haven't had that, but they still pump out of all the other ones, the Moody Canal and all the other canals north.
I think they can just take the lesson what they're doing in Stewart already. They've slowed down that. They've slowed down all that water coming out of the Stewart, and those beaches are thriving again. You don't have that dark water coming down. I mean, that's what's happening in the bay now. I don't understand why they can't see the correlation.
So I'm
If
saying
they're
maybe
doing that in
down
Stewart,
here.
if they're doing that in Stewart, they got to be pushing that water someplace else. And
Yeah, down here.
yeah, down the toilet. Down to the toilet.
They're putting it in the Everglades,
Behind the Miccosukee. Right
behind
out.
Miccosukee.
You know, it's definitely a multi-pronged problem, and
Well, that
you know,
area feeds off the sawgrass, which is not a preserved area anyway. So they're probably just using that whole thing as a buffer to get rid of that, push that water down. But that it's just very interesting, the numbers you got on Little River, the flow. It's amazing.
yeah, it's really quite alarming. Like I said,
Yeah.
it's significant, and now there's probably 24 algae specialists and water quality specialists who are all looking at this extremely closely.
Right.
So
I like to think they all came down from Port St. Lucie where they got their spurs, at the Stewart.
You got that right.
I'm sure they're gonna. You got to get the captains for clean waters on it. Then,
Well, you already have Biscayne Bay Water Watch. You were saying that.
yeah,
Well, I actually,
everybody's got to get involved.
Yeah.
well, to that end, Mr. Pedersen wrote me, and I believe his granddaughter's on the phone, or I think that's her.
Okay.
En garçon. Well, anyway, he asked.
That's me. Hi.
That's you. Hi. Okay. Yeah. So your grandfather was asking, you live out of state, but might be coming to Florida to go to school, coming to Miami. And the big question is, of course, what can we do? And I mean, I can give you a list of a million things, starting with how to plant a Florida-friendly yard and minimize your fertilizer and pesticide use and make your yard still look beautiful. But the bigger and probably more important thing is to contact your local elected officials and vote for those who you believe are going to consider all of the best scientific information in making future policy decisions. And that's as far as I can get without getting in trouble.
Right.
But that's the biggest thing that's going to have the longest lasting impact.
Unfortunately, our email, there's a couple of captains for clean waters on our emails. And unfortunately, they did not show up. I figured I'd get some captains, but.
Well, you know what? This is recorded, so we can give the link to them so that they can review the presentation.
Okay.
You can still get in touch with us or Anna. That's one of the useful things of doing this. All right, so Anna, thank you. Great presentation. Really
Question.
appreciate it.
I
Thank
saw
you.
a talk on the Goliath grouper in a couple of weeks. Can you just say briefly what that's about?
Oh yeah, that's part of my shameless plug. That's part of my bi-weekly Wednesday webinars that my colleagues and I started during this lovely COVID situation. And tomorrow we're having a guest speaker from FPL talking about the crocodile monitoring that happens down at Turkey Point. And then 2 weeks from tomorrow, I'll be talking about the biology and ecology and a little bit of general conservation information about the Goliath grouper, since it is their spawning season.
Mm-hmm. Well, how can we be a part of that?
Yeah, send us your link.
I was gonna say I can email Herman the information and he can distribute it. I
Yeah,
feel
we'll
like that's
distribute
probably
it
the
to
easiest.
group. Yeah.
Good.
Excellent.
Thank you for asking.
Has anybody looked at the nutrient load in the New River effluent?
David. I believe so. I think Biscayne Bay Aquatic Preserves has some data sondes in the New River. And right now there are so many maps and graphs in my head from all the calls I can't remember. But David, I'm making a note of your question. And my plan is to try and get as many responses to these questions as I can, and then bombard Herman, and he can distribute them to all of you guys.
That's great.
But yeah,
Anna,
I'll
you've
check.
got
'Cause I
Herman's
know-
number. Don't lose it.
Oh, I have his phone number. I have his email. We text. We go way back.
We've known each other now for what, 10 years, 8 years, something like that.
10 years, 25.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, but I'll look into I'll ask about the New River nutrients, but I believe the main, I want to say the New River was going to be the focus of the aquatic preserves future monitoring. There are all these projects across the board that, of course, changed in nature or got canceled due to COVID, but
Right.
and now things have been adjusted since the fish kill, so priorities have shifted, and so has monitoring and all that.
Is there a big difference between the dissolvability of oxygen in seawater versus freshwater?
Well, and that's exactly, I didn't want to get into it too much because the word frightens me a little bit, but stratification, that's exactly what
Right.
the researchers are talking about, is that freshwater layer that's sitting on top of the salt water is also potentially affecting the ability of the oxygen to disperse through the water as well.
I have an article. I'll try to find it for you because I was looking for the freshwater wells, that existed in the bay. And I didn't find those, but I did find a study which showed the stratification, but the water at the lower levels was a lower salinity than at the top because you get hydration coming through the lime rock.
Right.
So you still get fresh water flushing up, even though they're not boiling out in wells.
Right. Right, and I've heard those stories from, well, mostly one of my good dive buddies who has been on the bay his entire life and said you could drive a boat and see the fresh water. You could see it
In the wet season, I think you still can, but in any event, there's a general hydration from the bottom to the top, so the salt levels are lower on the bottom than the top. So that may also be coming into play, especially with the increased flow in Little River. There may be more of that flushing because you also had the gradient at the bottom had lower oxygen than the top.
Herman, you should have given this presentation.
Oh, Anna.
You just explained that way better than And thank you, Thomas, for bringing that up.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Herman could be the new Biscayne Bay chief.
Right.
I go for him.
I think, Anna, you should do it.
I'm very content in my position and happy to not be really too heavily politically affiliated.
Yeah, that's what would happen. You'll become politically affiliated then.
Your political hats job. But you've done a great job.
It gets to be a lot more challenging. Yeah.
All right. So again, I guess we still need to talk about our outing for Saturday. So
right.
Any other one last opportunity for a question, or? Okay. Well, thank you again, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you all. My pleasure. Thank you for your great questions. I'll definitely be following up.
Wonderful to see you. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.